world, worked for probably the smallest public accounting firm in the world during that time. So I've got a lot of experience, and every bit of that experience, as those of you who may have been in different careers and different jobs, every piece of that experience feeds forward and has some value in what you're doing. So I really appreciate the fact that I've had the opportunity to wear a businessman's hat. I appreciate the fact that I've had the opportunity to wear a public accounting hat, where I went out and visited maybe 50, 100 businesses during my career, saw different ways to operate. We're certainly going to talk a good bit about finance. We're going to talk a little bit about each of these other areas. We'll talk a little bit about what may be a future bond referendum in this district. But first, I need to call on you for some help. Most of you know that school finance is in the state of a bit of a turmoil. We will have this next year about $6 million less to spend than we had last year. $6 million out of about a $160 million budget. That's a big, big chunk of change. We have worked very hard over the last 2 years to squeeze our budget down, to find efficiencies and ways that we can save money without having a negative impact on the classroom. Now, in doing that, we've had to look at some what we call enrichment things. You know, what field trips did our kids used to get to take that they can no longer take? What perks do our teachers are they used to that they're no longer used to, that they're no longer going to be able to get? We're not going to strip down the quality of education, but we've had to take maybe some of the richness of education that maybe you enjoyed when you were a student. Some of that we're having to back off of. It's not a bad thing at all. School districts really should, every 3 to 5 years, look at themselves all over again, and even if you're not in that mode, by necessity say, I need to act like my budget's being cut by 10%. Because then you determine the things that you really value the most. And you make sure you take care of those things. And then you look at other things that are nice to have, maybe enriching, but that just aren't where you want to put your first dollars. But Dr. Brown and I have been talking about school finance. There is no sign of new money on the horizon. Certainly not for next year, probably not for the next 2 years after that. So we've decided we have to go elsewhere to find some more revenue, and that's where you're going to come in. We have decided that we're going to start our own company. It's going to be called Birdville Motors. We're going to design a new car that is unique for this community. We're going to compete with our dear friends at 5 Star Motors, with our friends at Buick dealership and the Lexus dealership. We're going to design something that's just exactly right for this community. And we have already done preliminary engineering. We've made a lot of important decisions. Mark and I met. You see Mark is high fashion. He has decided what the body style would be. He's decided what the paint color would be, what the suspension system would be. He's decided what type of motor we'll have in that vehicle. Some of those things we've already put together, but now we're in those final engineering phases, and that's where you come in. We need you to help us engineer this vehicle. Each one of your tables is going to be an engineering team. We're going to give you a price list, a list of the features you have to decide. In the upper right-hand corner, you will have the total amount that you can spend on that vehicle. There is no incentive to spend any less than that. Okay, you're not going to be chosen. Your firm will not be chosen to serve this district because you spend $100 less than the other guy. So load it up with all the features that you can come up with. Other factors, you will see how long it takes to put each of these components on the vehicle. All right? You've only got 12 total available days to do that. So don't choose a feature that's going to take you, and when you add that feature, it's going to take you to 13 days, or you will be disqualified. You cannot spend more than your budget. 2 other features I want you to think about. One is labor. You can hire less experienced labor for each individual feature, or more experienced. Less expensive labor costs $100, and these instructions will be on the back here. Less expensive labor costs $100 a day. More expensive labor costs $150 a day. So you got to balance features sometimes with quality of labor. One other little thing I'll throw in, you'll notice that you've got to decide the type of wheels that you have on this vehicle. If you look carefully at the numbers, you will see that you get more miles per dollar out of your wheels with the most expensive wheels. So if you can afford them, that'd probably be a good deal to do. If you can't, though, you don't want to leave the doors off the car, I guess, so that you can have wheels that'll take care of you 3 years from now. So those are the kind of decisions I need you to make. Again, each one of you will have a sheet to work on. This is an exercise that should take you about 7 minutes. Work individually and then work collaboratively. You got to have one of these?
Not one of the groups.
Huh?
This is one of the groups.
Oh, all by itself. You're going to work individually, and then you're going to work collaboratively. Then Mark's going to gather some information, and we will select the winning team. The winning engineering team will be put on the payroll of Burnsville ISD as our engineers. So work carefully with it.
Well, that's a good way to get people involved. It's all about making choices. Okay.
All about the way.
All right, let's wrap it up. Did every table manage to come up with at least one completed sheet? All right, what tables did we have that were listed as team number 1? Team number 1 here, team number 2. Did you look on your sheet? Team number 2, team number 3.
3's over here. That's team number 1.
All right. Okay, let's talk about it a little bit now. Are we still collaborating? Through the miracle of technology, we have moved through the group. We have used Mark's photographic memory, and we have captured, while you were still working, we captured some of what you have put together. And we have word processed that into the system. So we're going to look at different teams and the things that you came up with. And we're going to start with team number 3. I'll skip forward to that one. So here we are, team number 3. Team number 3 spent $700 on the chassis. They used that was a 2-day process. They used the most expensive labor. I guess they made a decision that the foundation of the vehicle, that they wanted to make sure that was put together right before they dealt with anything else. That gave them a total cost of $1,000, 2 days for assembly. The engine, they used the expensive labor on the engine also. $900 for that. Airbags. Team number 3 decided that they would go with the moderately safe airbags and the cheap labor for installation. Radio, they went with a basic $50 radio, $150 of labor costs, so they bought a cheap radio and used expensive people to put it in. I'm sure they'll fix it. Total of $200. Anti-theft system, they went with the basic anti-theft system. They used cheap labor to do that. Wheels, they went with the midline wheels. Remember I told you earlier, really bang for the buck. You were better off looking at the most expensive wheels because you got more miles per dollar spent, but we just couldn't fit it in here. Team 3 couldn't fit that in and do the other things they needed, so they had to take a little shorter term look at it. Interior, they went with the cloth and cheap labor to put that in. They put a standard roof, couldn't afford the sunroof for the panoramic roof. And quality control, they went with the mid-range of quality control. They used expensive labor on quality control. They came up with 11 days for total and $4,000 to put it all together. So they came in on time. They came in on budget. Doesn't look like a Lexus to me, but it looks like a vehicle that would function. So let's give a little bit of a hand to team number 3. Not a big hand, but a smattering of applause for him. All right, is this a vehicle that one of you would be in the market for? Maybe. Let's go back and let's look at team number 2. Team number 2, and you will have a copy of these filled out sheets in your handouts here now, I believe. Team number 2, they went with the more expensive labor on their chassis, like team number 1 did. The engine, they were able to go with the more expensive labor on their engine. They were able to go to superior airbags. $250 for material, $300 for the labor. Still went with the basic radio, $50, expensive installation though. Anti-theft, $100 and $150. I think that was pretty much like team number 3. They were able to go, they made a wise economic decision. They looked a little to the future and said, we're going to go with the expensive wheels, $400 for the wheels, expensive labor to put those on. Interior cloth, $150 and $100, standard roof, and then they went to the midline of quality control, 2 days of quality control, and they came in at 12 days. Took an extra day to do it, but that was within budget, and they came in within their budget. Now, why was this group able to do a little bit more than team number 3 was? It seems to me this is a little bit better vehicle than team number 1 had. I know that they went with some more expensive wheels. I think they went with better quality airbags. Are they just a smarter bunch of folks? What's the difference between the two? $500 more. So are you saying that I gave you all the same task? Each group had the same task. Each group had the same challenges, and yet somebody had $500 more to spend than the other group? Well, that doesn't seem quite fair, does it? Doesn't seem like a good way to select an engineer. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, we have decided that the quality of the radio counts 15% of our selection process. So probably putting in the cheap radio wasn't a good idea. If you put in a cheap, well, wait a minute, how could that be fair that I would come up, ask you to do as it's designed, tell you that one group has got $500 less than the next group, and then tell you after the fact that one of the most important things we're going to look at is quality of radio? Doesn't really seem like a system that you would want to do if you were selecting an engineer. It seems to me that I put some rules here in place, some after the fact, some at the beginning, that would lead me maybe to even make a bad decision about which engineering group I was going to go to. So let's go to the last group. Let's go to team number 1. Well, team number 1, you see that they had a chassis with an engine for $1,100, and that only took 3 days to install, and they were able to use good labor with that. Wait a minute, why didn't team number 2 and 3 choose that option of a chassis with the motor already mounted on it? Wasn't available to you? You know, that would be kind of like saying, okay, we're going to judge you all your outcome, we're going to judge it all the same, but we're going to give you a starting point that's ahead of other people. That would be kind of like if you went into a school district and you said, here's one district, and the children in this district come from homes that are housed primarily with lawyers and doctors and professional people, mostly 2-parent households, where the kids come to school. When they get there in kindergarten, they're reading on the 1st or 2nd grade level. They're kids that are motivated to learn. You know, we don't have to start their engine and get them motivated. They come to school motivated. Well, that seems to me that's what's happened to team number 3. They're starting from a different point than teams number 1 and team number 2, and they have that extra $500 that I guess team number 3 didn't have. So they've got more money, and they're starting from a different point. And you can see as you go down the line, they're able to go with quality airbags. Oh, they went to the Bose radio, they get an extra 15% for that. Midline anti-theft system, the most expensive wheels, leather interior, a sunroof. They're the only ones I think that went away from the standard radio and the standard roof. And even they, having to stay within their $4,500 and 12-day budget, even this group was required to go to mid-level on quality. Now, that's what school districts deal with. I'm not saying that is something that you should feel bad about. The lower funded districts, the districts with more of a challenge because we've got more students that are from poor homes, a language challenge, single parent homes, whatever the challenge is. But I want you to understand the difference in challenge and the difference in resources. To put that in perspective, Birdville ISD is the second lowest funded district in Tarrant County. The difference between our district, we receive, or we are entitled to, about $5,200 per student to do all of the things that the state government and the federal government require us to do. The highest funded district in Tarrant County receives somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 more per student to educate those students. And I will tell you that when you look at the demographics of that district, more of those students are going to start school that first day with basic math skills, with basic reading skills, with basic social skills than will in this district. So, same or even less money, dramatically different challenges, and yet the state and the feds use the same measurement standards as if we're all the same. What are some of the decisions that you had to make in a group when you were deciding what you could fit into your budget? Some things that you would have liked to have had, but you said, here's going to be my number one priority. Yes?
Ours, we did away with the radio and like that. We just kind of put those to the side and prioritize more the wheel quality control.
So you started with the basics and with the quality control. You said these are the have-to-have, and then you said here are the things that would enrich this vehicle. You can get to work with or without a radio. You can get to work with or without a sunroof. You may enjoy the drive more if you have those other features. You may get there in more comfort. You may be more productive when you get there because you're in a better mood. But you had to choose between, in some cases, quality and luxury, and make sure that you got those basics taken care of. And I'll go back to the wheel issue again. We've all been forced, every year we're forced into decisions. I know what's best for me 3 years from now. I know that if I invest right now in this, I won't have the bigger payoff this year, but it means my students will be in better shape 3 years from now. Yet as the state squeezes tighter and tighter and tighter on funding, we're required to make shorter-term decisions. How do we get to this day? Maybe I can add that radio later. Maybe I can go back and fix this if I put lower quality in later. Maybe there'll be more money to fund it later. Those are the tough decisions that we have to make as a district day in and day out. So how do we get to a finance system? How does a finance system works? How does a finance system work that gives less money to one group of kids and more money to the other? And this is not a magic act. I'm going to do a little visual demonstration that I think you'll be able to carry out with you. I want you to imagine that you've got a student that's moving from district to district. These are not 3 different students with different characteristics. Let's say it's your son, and you initially move in and you're going to live in the highest funded school district in the state. and your son is going to go to schools in that district, the way the state funding formula works is the state says, raise what you can with local property taxes. We will determine as a district how much money you need to educate your student, each homogeneous student in that district. So they've decided that if you live in the highest funded district in the state, with local property taxes, you raise what you can. And the state will make up the difference. The same student moves to a moderately funded district. Same exact student. And the state says, in that district, you're only going to have this much to educate that student. The standard is the same. Sounds like equalization. Your job is to raise what you can with a $1.04 tax rate in this district. And the state's going to make up the rest. Then you move to Birdville ISD. This is the funds you have available to you. There's an $800 difference for that same student. And we have the same requirements. We want you to teach them the same thing. We want you to have them leave high school prepared to enter the workforce with the same skill set as they do in a highly funded district. So raise what you can with the $1.04 tax rate, and we'll make up the difference. Now, change my measurements a little bit here. The truth is, this district, the most highly funded district, has more money than they need to fill this jar from the $1.04 tax rate. Whatever's left over, the state claws that back. Okay, they need to raise $6,000 for a student with a $1.04 tax rate. They raise $6,100. That money comes back, and they gather up that money, and the state says, good, we can use that to make up the shortfall in these other districts. Do you follow me so far? Okay, so what the state does is they said, all right, they got all the money they need, we've clawed back what we need. Now, the state is going to make up the difference here. These are state dollars. And locally, for us, actually there wouldn't be any state money running over. But at the end of the exercise, what they've done is said, and it sure sounds equitable, you raise what you can with a $1.04, and we'll make up the difference. The problem is, they're making up the difference on this guy who has a lot of money, this guy who has a little bit, this guy has a little. So how do we get ourselves in a system that's so unfair? Obviously, nobody can look at this and say it's fair for us to have 20% less money to spend per student for the same challenge than a district who's got that extra 20% and maybe even has a little less challenge because their kids are more likely to come to school motivated and prepared. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was a disparity of before what we call the Robin Hood plan, which is taking the little extra off the top of this fat cat and passing it down the line. Before that, there was a disparity of literally 700 to 1 between the funds available in a wealthy district and the funds available in the poorest district in the valley. The poorest district in the valley might have 40 kids in a second grade classroom. And that second grade classroom might be in a shopping mall that was being torn down, but they recaptured it. And then you might have the highest paid district, the wealthiest district, and they may have literally 700 times as much money. So the state decided that that was inequitable. And they identified you should have equal resources for each student. And they looked at the process and they said, how would we do this? This Robin Hood plan of taking from the rich and giving to the poor to equalize sounded pretty good. And they started looking towards equalizing these jars. And then political pressure took hold. And folks would say, look, I'm in a district that can raise $8,000 a student with my local property taxes. That's coming from the sweat of my brow. I've worked hard, I've gone to college, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I've got a big house, that's what's driving this. Why should all of my money go to people who are less successful than me? And so the state moved towards equity, okay? They moved from 700 to 1 to a ratio that may be as high as 1.5 to 1. And everybody recognizes year after year that that equity needs to be improved. That there are districts that are significantly lower funded than us, not in Tarrant County, but in other areas. And everybody recognizes that that needs to be improved. And every year they scratch and struggle with how they can get that done politically, how they can get it past the governor, how they can get it past their local constituents. So does that give y'all a pretty decent picture, first of all, of the difference of challenges between districts, and then how the funding formula works? $1.04 of tax rate. We raise what we can. The state determines what our kids are worth. And obviously, it's not as much as they think someone else's kids are worth. And they make up the difference to get us to those relative positions. Again, the exercise that you went through, the elements of decisions you had to make, the unfairness of decisions being made after the fact, the unfairness of having the same measurement for each of these engineering teams, and yet having, even though you have the same measurement, you have a different level of resources. Those are all facts of school district finance. The state came in after they issued the test, after we put our budgets together, after we had our plans, and said, oh, by the way, here's the passing standard. By the way, we're going to count these things at a higher percentage than you might have thought. It's just a fact of what we deal with. There's one other slide that we want to look at. One back.
Space.
One other thing we want to look at, there have been 5 lawsuits that have been filed this year that relate to school finance. People are looking at different things in all 5. Now, I'll tell you that one group is looking at adequacy. One group is saying, we don't care how much you equalize us, there won't be enough money in the system to do what the state and the feds say we have to do. It's just inadequate funding. One group is looking at equity. They're saying, gosh, just get us equal, put us on an equal playing field, and we'll continue to produce, we'll continue to excel. There's another group that's looking at adequacy and equity. Make us equitable and put adequate money in the system. There's another group that's looking at efficiency. This is the group that makes the statement, they love to get a soundbite on the news that said that school districts have one administrator for every teacher that they have. Have you ever heard anybody make that statement? One administrator for every teacher. Now, they include in administrators everybody who's not a teacher. So a bus driver to them is an administrator, a cafeteria worker, an aide, a librarian, a nurse. All of those are administrators, and everybody else is a teacher. Their pitch is we just need to drive our costs down. In fact, their pitch is we're getting too much money, plenty of money in the system. We just need to drive our costs down. The group that talks about adequacy would give you this example. They would take and they would have all the features that you had, and they'd say we need quality. We need to give the students the best that we possibly can if we're going to have outstanding results. In fact, we need to add anti-lock brakes to that. We need to go from a standard transmission to an automatic transmission. We believe that we need $6,800 to educate each of our students, and everybody needs to educate each one of their students. We have challenges. We're happy to face those challenges. We've worked hard over the last couple of years to make sure that we could find efficiencies that did not impact students negatively in that classroom. But we are moving towards a point. There's a threat that there will be additional funding cuts in the next legislative session. You're going to move to a point where it has to have a very negative impact on students. There's just so much you can cut because teacher salaries represent 55, 60% of the budget. You can't cut enough elsewhere and still get the kids to school, still feed them, and still have a quality education. So my mantra is, at what cost? The state is saying, here are these things that we will not bend on. No new taxes, no cuts elsewhere, no lessening of regulations that don't positively impact students. My question is, those are noble goals, but at what cost? Is it at the cost of a generation? Is it at the cost of kids being, elementary kids being 25 or 30 to a classroom? I have far exceeded my time on this part. Look in your packet, if you will. I want to give you some basic information about financial facts about verbalized. We have about 72.7, through Robin Hood program, about $72.7 million in local property tax revenue. State, to get us to our $5,200 per student, gives us another $89.5 million, about $1.9 million from the feds. So this next year, we think we'll have a budget of about $164 million. Enrollment of about 22,900 students. About 900 of those stay home every day. That gets us to about 22,000 students. And once again, we have about $5,200 per regular ed student with no specific challenges. Every time a student is absent, it costs us about $30 a day initially. That's $30 a day in funding. Plus, as you all know, if a student's not there, they're likely not learning. So we add on to that the cost of remediation. We have taxable property value of a little over $7 billion. Now, I want to emphasize again, here's what happens. Your home is worth $150,000, and you're charged $1.04 tax rate. Your home is reappraised, and the value goes up to $175,000. Your tax bill goes up. The school district does not receive any extra money because the fact that your tax bill went up. What happens is your tax bill adds to the local, and the state says, good, now we don't have to give you as much. So when your local property tax bill goes up because your value goes up, all that's happening is the state coffers are getting a little fuller. We have the same finite amount of money. Does that make sense to you?
No.
No? That doesn't make sense because it shouldn't be, or it doesn't make sense because
It
doesn't
shouldn't
make
be.
sense? Okay, because it shouldn't be. Our debt service tax rate, our current M&O tax rate is $1.04. That's not going to change in this district anytime soon. Our debt service tax rate, this is the 2011 rate, is 39.5 cents. Now, M&O tax rate and debt service tax rate. M&O tax rate pays for our basic operations. It pays teachers' salaries. It pays for electricity, paper, materials, supplies, transportation. It pays the basic day-to-day operations. Debt service tax rate is to pay our mortgage, in effect. It's to pay for the buildings that we construct. Most of the buildings we sell, or that we build and have about a 20-year, 22-year mortgage on those buildings. So that debt service tax rate, we can set at whatever rate is required to pay off the debt on those buildings. We can't set it any higher, and we can't use that money for any other purpose. We cannot raise our debt service tax rate and say we'll use some of that money to pay teachers' salaries, because legally it can't be used for that purpose. And by the way, there is virtually no equalization in the debt service tax rate. So when I go to build a $15 million building, and the higher funded district, because they've got more property value, goes to build it, they can charge a lower tax rate to build that same building. So more inequity in the system. So our total debt service is $27.6 million. We have about 1,580 teachers in the district, 285 administrative and professional positions, which would include our principals, it would include the cabinet, some central office folks, 20 technology folks. Don't get upset, Randy. I know you only have 17, but I wanted to go with round numbers. Clerical and paraprofessional. Those would be our things like classroom aides, our secretaries, and so forth. And then auxiliary, nutrition, transportation, B&G. Again, the folks who are saying that we're inefficient would say that we have 1,580 teachers and that we have roughly 1,300 administrators, because they believe a bus driver is an administrator. Starting teacher salary for this next year, we believe for a bachelor's degree will be $48,000. We are one of the 10 largest employers in all of Tarrant County. Other facts, we serve 18,500 lunches every day in this district. 5,500 breakfasts. And to give you an idea of the poverty level in this district, or near poverty level, 60% of the meals that we serve are served on a free and reduced basis. That means, and the way that they get to free and reduced is being at a poverty level below the national standard. Our buses travel about 900,000 miles per year, and we transport 3,800 students to and from school every day. Our building and grounds department maintains 38 permanent structures and 69 portable structures for a total of about 3,650,000 square feet of space. We operate 33 campuses. 18 of those campuses are over 40 years old. 12 of those campuses are over 50 years old. 12 of those 18. And we have one campus, our oldest campus, which is our Shannon Learning Center, where we have our DAEP program, our disciplinary programs, and other programs. It was built in 1947 now. Some of you can remember back 40 years old and what it was like to go to school 40 years ago. Some of you can't. But I can tell you that the electrical capacity to run the computers we have today, when I went to, I can remember the elementary school I went to, not a thought of air conditioning. We were in Houston in the hot humidity that those schools were built for a little bit of airflow, which we can't do anymore. So schools that were built even 15 years ago are very challenged to meet all of our needs in terms of technology and student safety. Another thing that we've noticed is a big issue in this district. Now when you build a new school, you build it with security vestibules, so people cannot walk in off the street and walk down the hall with people in the front office not knowing. Most of our campuses do not have a security vestibule. We're getting ready to increase, put buzzer systems on the front door, do some other things to add security. But the challenge wasn't as great a challenge when I went to school. You didn't have as many non-custodial parents walk in and want to snatch their kid out and disappear. You didn't have crazy people walking in off the street wanting to shoot up the school. So other challenges we have. You've got a sheet in your packet called Tracking the Education Dollar. This is put together by state funding gurus who go out each year and look at all of the districts around the state and say, let's talk about the how they spend their dollar. Are we spending it on things that we don't want to spend our money on? And this is a great sheet for people to look at and decide, do you want to spend that money or not? Now, there are efficiencies we can have in each of these areas, but the top of it starts with 3 cents of every educational dollar we have goes to transportation. Any teacher, you as a parent, know that you've got to get the kids to school if you want them to learn. As the population gets more and more economically challenged, there are more and more kids who don't have a second parent who can drive them to school, or who maybe have to move into a place that's further from the school so their student can't walk. So 3 cents for transportation. As we go through this, just raise your hand if you see an area you want to do away with. So anybody want to do away with transportation? They arrive to find that the building is clean and well maintained. The doors are on the hinges. There's glass in the windows. The floors are polished. Air conditioning system hopefully is working. Anybody want to do away with that for your student? The building is heated in winter and cooled in the summer. And the lights are working. Anybody want to do away with utility costs? Parents know her school is made safer by district-supported security staff, and then if she's injured or becomes ill, she'll be cared for by the school nurse. Anybody want to do away with that? Goes to class to find a teacher ready to begin instruction. 49 cents out of every dollar in most districts. I'll tell you that in this district, rather than 49 cents out of every dollar going into teachers and teacher salary, we're up more in the 54, 55% range. And that happens as you tighten your belt more and more. You need to do away and minimize the other things. So percentage-wise, the commitment to the teachers goes up. While in class, they have an instructional aid and instructional supplies. Teacher uses curriculum to align, so forth on down the list. Guidance counselors, lunch, you have a principal, you have an assistant principal, you have some district level staff that works to provide guidance and resources to those folks. And at the end of the school day, she rides back home after participating in some extracurricular activities. That's the breakdown of how we spend our dollars. When you compare the way we spend our dollars, people want to compare us to a charter school. People want to compare us to a school in Finland. And you will see some things that they say we don't want to provide for our kids. We don't want to provide any extracurricular activities. Those are club activities. If you're wealthy enough that you can pay for those as a parent, then you pay for those. They don't provide, some systems don't provide any counseling services. Some systems aren't. They set a meal price and you pay it or you don't. You go home. These are things that we've decided as a community, as a state, that we value, that we think they're important so that every child can get to school, can be in a decent frame of mind, can have a reasonably full belly, and can be safe and can learn. The last thing that we want to talk a little bit about, and we alluded to it a minute ago, is the bond referendum. We are shooting to have a bond referendum in May of this next year. We're going to be putting together, gathering data, bringing in all kinds of specialists, getting all kinds of guidance, looking at all of our facilities. We have a limited capacity for selling bonds. Even if we could get the community to say we will support all the bonds you want to sell, the state says we can only have a debt service tax rate, a maximum of 50 cents of debt service tax rate. With that, we could probably have a bond referendum of $165, $170 million. If I added up the needs in our district, if I looked at all the campuses that are 40 years old, 30 years old, 25 years old, if I looked at all of the challenges we've got to provide our students with new technology, I think we could easily spend $450 million and spend it well. And you would be proud of your students. You wouldn't look out there and say, look at this waste. We're not talking about to build a nicer administration building or a bigger football stadium. We're talking about for the basics, to get well-heated, well-air conditioned, energy efficient. I talked to you about the fact that we have to make decisions sometimes that are a little bit short-term in nature. You know, it would be better to put a 20-year or a 30-year roof on this building, but all we can afford right now is a 20-year roof and hope things will be better in the future. But we'll be looking to come back to the community. First of all, we'll gather information this summer, then we'll come back to the community in September. We will pull together a committee of community members to look at what we believe our needs give their input, reshape our thinking a little bit, and say, here's what we believe we can support as a community. Hopefully some of you will be on that committee. And then we would go back to the board in December or January, ask them to approve or modify the plan that our community has come together with. Between January and May, we would inform the community about the referendum, and in May, we would hope to have it approved. And then this next summer, we would be able to start working on things. Things like student safety. We don't have alarms in our schools. We have some schools that are being broken into literally once a week. Once a week, the teachers come to school and find one or more classrooms with a broken window, computers missing, that type of thing. We don't have fences around a lot of our campuses, around most of our campuses. There probably wasn't a need early on, but we just can't, the way we are now, we can't have people able to walk in off the street and into a portable building without anyone in the office already there. Air conditioning systems. In our oldest campuses, there's no air conditioning or heating in the hallways. So when the temperature gets to 102 degrees, they try to vent a little bit of air off of the classroom and air condition the hallway. My kids learned that method when they were young. It was a little warm in the kitchen, they'd leave the refrigerator door open. It's kind of the same kind of efficiency that you get from there. We have a lot of needs with a lot of facilities. And we have to get this one right, because we don't see our capacity going up in the future. We don't see 2 or 3 years from now the state saying, let's raise that cap. Plus, when we come to the community, we want you to feel like we have a good plan and that it's one that's going to last us a little while. Dr. Brown was in Katy ISD, I was in Fort Bend ISD, and we went to the community every 3 to 4 years, and we told them, we're doing this bond referendum, we'll be back in 3 years, and we'll do the next one. We'll be back in another 3 years, and we'll do the next one. We don't have the ability or capacity to get into that kind of rhythm in this district. I think whatever we do in this bond referendum, we'll probably have to plan on, as a minimum, 6 years before we can do anything else, maybe 10 or 12 years. That is my spiel on school district finance and on all of the other things that we have to do to transport, feed, get our kids. Any questions or comments that any of you have before I turn it over to Dr. Brown? Yes, sir.
The question, you had the 5,200 you had for per student, and that seems to vary among school districts. Did I miss how that was set in the first place?
Yes, that's the different size jars. Districts that were very wealthy, when they started the Robin Hood plan, they said, we'll squeeze them back a little bit, but we're not going to squeeze them back to where there is underfunded as the rest of it. And it also, I need to make it clear, it also varies by student. If you have a student that is language challenged, or if you have a student that needs some special education services, or if you have a certain number of students that are gifted and talented, you will get some more money to meet those special challenges based on how many of those students you have. When I was talking about the same student here to here, and yet them not being exactly the same, again, they don't give us extra for saying those students came to school ready to read. Those students are going to go home and be with parents who help them do their homework and help them prepare. But there is some help from the feds, a little help from the state, based on what I would call our demographic challenges. But even for those students, if I have $6,000 for a student who is dyslexic, that high-paid district, they're going to have $6,500 for that student. There's no equalization.
And that's part of the challenge. If you hear about the lawsuits, that's exactly what it's based on, because there's not a good answer. There's not an answer with, oh, that makes sense. It's like, that's the answer. It's why is that? Well, because there is inequity, and it's very obvious. You look at why do they get more? You can understand a little. You say, why would this school district get a little bit more? Because you realize the cost of living in the place might be a little bit more, so a teacher needs to make a little bit more for housing. You can think of a little difference. If there's 5 to 10% difference, you go, that makes sense. Those houses are a little more, your apartments a little more. But you can't come up with what would equate to $40 million a year that we could get very investment in another district of an option. I mean, what can we do with that? It's absolutely amazing. Yes. Okay.
You said there was 20 people who were technology people supporting the district.
Actually, there's
What is that? 17. What is that? What is that? How does that break down? I mean, there's how many campuses across the district? Does that support like the student information system, or is that people on the campuses supporting technology?
That's not people on the campuses supporting technology. It's split between, we have an inside infrastructure, the network, the servers. We have a help desk, which does support all campuses and all administrative offices. We have on-campus staff. We have instructional technology. And we also have teams and student records come to us. So all of the 17 are all mixed into that. So about 3 to 4 people in each area, with the exception of instructional technology.
Yes, sir.
You said that the pilot district had about $800 more per student. I'm just curious which district is that?
I'm going to profess ignorance. I really don't like to point out. I'll tell you a couple of people. It's not HEB. It's not Keller.
If one of us said it, would you hear? No, you're not telling them.
What?
In addition to that, HEB, you mentioned HEB, and I know that they just did pass a bond election. And are they, as far as going to the community and asking for these, or trying to sell these bonds, are they in a similar situation with something that we gain from what they do?
Oh, you can always look at, there's strategies, and I think the most important thing is a clear communication of need, and so that your voters, your public's informed. When you point out the needs, and you can clearly say, for example, if you're a growing district, it's pretty easy. You throw the demographic numbers up to say, you don't want to pass a bond, that's fine. We'll have, in 2 years, we'll have 1,400 kids at this elementary and 32 portables. Not a problem. Or we can rezone and do these things here. Sometimes the alternatives are not good. Or you just look at a campus, it's like, wow, it was built in 1954. Geez. And you show the foundation, you show the challenges, you show that for us to renovate this campus, it would be 92% of what the cost of a brand new campus would be. You just point out the things and say, well, why would you do that? So you just have to really inform your people of needs so that clearly a rational person would go, yeah, I understand that. We really need to do something. And you hope that there's enough people that says we do. We want good facilities for our children. We want to be able to get certain things in place that are reasonable. We're not trying to be the best and the greatest and the grandiose. We just want adequate. So I think informed people usually make good decisions.
Is vertical joining any of the planning groups and facilities?
We haven't to this point. There's gotten to be several of them, and a lot of districts have. We certainly discussed that. I'm not saying that we want to do that, but certainly we've had a lot of input, and we talked to our various groups and our legislators, and are fighting the battle that way. Just at this point, we've done some resolutions. We've done some things to clearly communicate our feelings. It's really gotten kind of muddled. If you just had 2 groups, one's equity and one's on adequacy, you could probably make some decisions, but it's gotten a little challenging. We're kind of waiting to see what comes out and what gains momentum, and then we'll share that with our board and see if they would like to do that.
And let me also say, we're covered by those lawsuits.
Yes, absolutely.
Whatever success they have will benefit this district. And let me throw out one other quick piece of information. Dr. Brown was saying, what could you do with that extra $800 a student? With $800 extra a student, we could give, if you want to put it all in one pot, we could give a $10,000 raise to every teacher in the district. With $800 extra per student, we could do almost a 20% reduction in the number of students in each classroom. So instead of 22 to 1, you'd have a teacher that would have 18 to 1. Or the reality is most of our classrooms aren't really 22, so maybe if they were at 20, you'd be able to get that down to 16. But enormous difference in capacity when you have that big spread.
Yes, sir.
The last bond election, that when Ben was built, and Walker Creek?
Yes, it was, no, that wasn't the last, that was one more recent.
The most recent one would have been Binion and Stowe, would have been the two, and then the rebuilding of Richardson High School.
Obviously, with the new administration, is the plan to continue looking at the older, I know Benton was a very old building, and that versus maybe like the older buildings like Richmond and Cheney, is that kind of still the plan with the new administration, or just?
Well, certainly to look at, and to honor the information that was presented, but certainly we can take a fresh look at things. You gotta look at efficiency too, the size of our schools, you gotta look at demographic numbers. When you see buildings that are already pretty small in number, and the trends are they're getting smaller and smaller, you've gotta ask yourself, can you continue to educate children in those small schools? So if you have two older schools, you've gotta challenge yourself and say, as difficult as it is, do we need to combine these schools to be more efficient? Because as anyone would tell you, there's some static costs in opening the building. But you're gonna have a principal and a counselor and certain things like that. We know old buildings also are less efficient. So you're gonna gain some money and efficiency of just updated equipment in the building, the glass and air conditioning units and things. So if you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars each time you combine schools, especially in areas where maybe they once were pretty large, but over 10 to 20 years, things change. Hard conversations, but you've only got a certain pot of dollars. And not any one community normally wants to let their school go, but when you're given so little money, sometimes you just have to do that. So I think we'll have to look at those choices and just decide what's in the best interest of our district. So I do think that what came from the last group, there were some of those concessions that, I don't think we can continue to sustain this. We're going to have to combine some campuses. Just looking at the greatest needs, what are the things that just absolutely can't last another 6 to 10 years, and hope that you can get enough of that done with maybe some renovations to the others to hold on to the next bond election. So hopefully it's just greatest need.
How are we gonna creatively communicate this bond referendum? Because I know most of us, we drive by and it's election year and vote yes or vote no. And I know you can put stuff in a kid's folder, but they're not necessarily, parents aren't gonna read it. I mean, is there, the popular media, we were actually complimented on the morning talk show because we had raised stuff and what's up school buses, and I'm listening to this guy and he sounded so educated, but he was so wrong. And as soon as we do this another year, that same guy's just gonna, hammer us like they did Keller. I mean, how do we beat that?
Well, there's certainly some examples going along with what the question was about HEB. There's certainly a lot of looking back at the past of how to do it right. You look back at the performance of the last 10 years of school districts and approaches they've taken, and what you're going to see is you're going to see some commonalities in bond elections that failed. What communications didn't work. You're also going to find some that says, wow, that really worked well. And I truly believe, from my experience, that in Katy, they all passed. And the reason was because it's a blitz. You've got to get out. When this starts to happen, as soon as we get this budget approved, my job is going to be to focus on this bond referendum because you've got to get it right. You've got to go out, get all the information, put it on the table, filter through it, look at the different decisions to be made, and then you've got to go out and you've got to get in those communities and you've got to explain it. Because I believe if we sit down and explain it to you and get it to where you're going, now I get it. Now I understand. I didn't know why you were doing this, but now I understand. It takes time. It takes an investment of time and effort in just showing people where they truly understand. I really didn't want to do this, but now I see why you've got to do that. Because the alternative really works. Or getting people to understand, I know you love your school, but in 8 years there's going to be 198 kids here. And we just can't continue to do that. That demographic is changing. So it's not about that you want to. It's like we can't sustain it. So once people see that and they understand it can't stay, then you transform that into, now let's talk about solutions. What we can do and what a good solution is and what your input now that you know it needs to change. Is it in between these two neighborhoods, or do we have options that we really need to build it over here because we have property already? Because many of our spaces are large enough that we can literally build a school next to it, school goes on, and then you transfer over, and that's ideal. You don't want to have to transfer kids for a year to tear out a building.
I think just the normal everyday voter, they think, you know, and I understand all this room where those dollars would go, where bond money goes, but they're thinking, I've done 3 fundraisers this year, and they're connecting all that together. They can't diversify.
No
But I
question.
had to sell popcorn and buy a football helmet. You know, we're not understanding how that's different.
Yes, there's a lot of teaching, if you understand, just trying these efforts right here. There's a lot of things we could be doing this morning, but we felt like this is what we do. So we invest our time to get people to go, you know, you don't learn a lot through these things, but you learn a little, and you get some insight. And most importantly, you get connections of somebody to email or somebody to call and says, hey, a guy asked me this question, and I'm not sure we addressed that, Mr. Seal. What's the answer to this question? To me, that's what you do. And then when you hear something that clearly said, hey, that's not right, you can say, you know, that's not right, and here's where you can go to read up on that. And that's what we need to do. Get a website, those commonly asked questions, to address those things that we know are misnomers that are out there. And then just, you go visit. You can go to different functions, you go to the schools, you find ways to get the parents there, because when the kids are going to perform afterwards, and you give them a little time, and then you let the kids sing and take pictures, it's all good. But you've got to get in front of the people and put things in their hands and answer the question. And slowly but surely, a few people at a time, you go, wow, now I have a better understanding of the challenges you're faced with while you're making some decisions.
Yeah, I think too, in the city council, and we, Holland City, had a bond last year, you know, we thought people were just going to forget, you know, we're not going to authorize any more money to be spent. But, you know, the voters really looked at it and said, you know, these are what we think are necessities. And 3 of them, you know, passed, and it was just kind of amazing, because we were just really sweating. I mean, we know we need better streets, we know we need a fire station, we know we need better parks. And those 3 things passed, because I think our voters are smart enough to look and see what our necessities are. It's kind of like this, if they go, it's not a necessity, it's not going to go. But if they look at it and know in their own mind and heart, this is the necessity, and they will vote for it. And I think we have to, you know, always kind of have that faith in our voters, and they do see necessity.
And just the last comment, I'll take another question too, is you know at your home, when money's tight, economy's not good, your spouse has lost their job, you don't want to go spend more money on your house. Well, what do you do when the roof starts leaking? That's probably not an area you're going to save money. And at some point, your house is pouring more money into the house and the value's going down. At some point, you have to say, we got to have another strategy. We've got to just bail out of this and start putting money into a better investment. You just have to inform people. And he said, oh, wow, we're going to need to continue to do this. This is not a good long-range strategy. If that's the right decision, what did you use to make that decision? If you get that information out, most people go, oh, wow, yeah, that makes sense. We can. I want to do that, but now I understand why you can't. I believe people will do it.
How about the Aspire program with the 21st Century Grant? Is that any money regarding that program for the teachers running it, the school, all of that, electricity, and the costs that come with that? Is that all covered by the grant, or is there other costs to the district to even be able to offer that against?
There are elements of that program that are charged back for those programs. We're not going to charge them building rental, which if someone else came in and wanted to use the building, we'd charge them building rental. They're not paying a cost for use of our facilities that they would be able to pay and do this as a standalone program, if that makes sense. They're paying what they can back, but in reality, a lot of the cost does lead up to the district because we believe it's it's kind of like a partnership. It's a critical product to our district.
How many campuses is that at, and how successful has it been in all the different campuses?
I think it varies. I think it's in most of our elementaries, all those that qualify, but 16 and 21 to Title I. I don't know if I've got to count.
I think we have Aspire at all of our elementaries except for 6. And those campuses are looking at a way to replicate what Aspire does. In a lot of cases, it's in a pay-as-you-go program But we're looking at a way to create equity for that around the district.
One other aspect that you talked about daily earlier, is that 900 bodies that aren't in the seats, or is that a combination of that and parties?
That and what?
Parties.
No, that's true.
You get funding for tardies.
Unless they're not there during the count period.
Right. And isn't like so many MSU parties considered apples, is that replicated over to the,
Not for
that's just a
funding.
district thing?
That's only for record keeping and for student accountability, but not for funding. Roughly 96%. You can figure the normal district has about 96% attendance on a year to day when you average it out. So whatever your total enrollment is, if you use 96% of that, that's a good average day.
I think you mentioned that all four is fixed right now, but the local option, you can increase that, or your bond thing, are you looking at it, will you increase your M&O as well? Or just gonna look at the campus?
At this point, it's not been discussed. You look at our tax rate, combined, we just don't have a lot of capacity for that. And we raised it to 13 cents. Those sometimes are a little tougher to pass. It's easier to sell someone when you look and say, look at our building, it's leaking, it's this and that. The rooms are high. There's a lot of functionality problems. You can see things are issues. It's harder to sell them on unique other things like that. They're passing at a rate of over 50%. But something we certainly look at.
You go down this list and you say, based on our rate, we're gonna have to get rid of A, B, and C. So that may be how you judge, well, if you're gonna spend money, you want to.
Well, that's kind of the approach. That's kind of the approach Keller unsuccessfully took. Keller's approach was, if you don't pass this tax rate increase, we're going to cut these programs. And I think it built resentment. People felt like it was a threat. There has only been one district that I'm aware of in the last 2 years that has tried to do a M&O tax rate increase and debt service tax rate increase in the same year. And both of them, they did 2 different elections at the same time. Both of them failed miserably. It really would be a challenge for us to go to the community and say, we want to raise your taxes here, we want to raise your taxes here. I think once we go into this, we're locking ourselves into that M&O rate, except if the sky falls even more than it's falling.
If we get to a point where we can say, folks, here's reality, the state has cut us this much, this is the level of service we're going to be able to give. I believe that's significantly less than what we're going to tolerate. And you get enough school parents saying, time out, I don't want my taxes to go up, but I can't tolerate that. So you're going to say, I don't want to either. Honey, I know we don't have the money, but the roof is leaking. And I'm not going to tolerate 35 kids in every class in high school. Sorry. And you go do what you have to do. That's where that would be. In other words, your back's against the wall. It's not a you do or you don't. You just go, that's outside my comfort zone. That's what you sell to the public. We hope it doesn't get to